Information Station 1370 WOCA. Ocala.
All right, 23 minutes before 10 o'clock. Whenever you hear about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, you say, gosh, when is this going to stop? Who do we blame? Why do we blame anybody? We have friends who are Muslim, who have family and friends in Palestine, and they visit there all the time, and they will often post photos on Facebook that are just heartbreaking. The good news is they're smiling in the pictures, but I'm sure that the surrounding areas aren't necessarily the best places to live. And what is with that whole circumstance? If you say anything, you're probably wrong because you haven't been there. You know, right. If you try to cite history, it's probably a moot point to cite history on both sides, because this is now. But then again, that's my opinion. We have somebody on the phone who would have a more educated opinion than I would have, or I'm guessing than most of us would have, with the exception of perhaps the folks we know who travel there from both on the Israeli side, our Jewish friends and our Muslim friends. And the funny thing is, they get along here. They get along here. It's the countries, it's the governments sometimes that are so messed up, not the people. Ben Ehrenreich has an amazing story to share with us. He has written a book. It's called The Way to the Spring, Life and Death in Palestine. Ben has an amazing set of credentials. He's an award-winning journalist. He's the recipient of the National Magazine Award. He's a contributor to the big ones, New York Times, Harper's, the London Review of Books, etc. Over the past 3 years, he has been traveling to and living in the West Bank, staying with Palestinian families in its largest cities and smallest villages, to do research for this book, I would assume. He's an American. Ben Ehrenreich. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Larry.
Where are you calling from?
At the moment, I'm in Washington, D.C.
Wow. This is a great contribution to us because we don't hear this side of the story a whole lot.
Thank you. Yeah, and that was one of the reasons that I thought it was important to write it. That it, as I began spending time there, it became clear to me how little the realities of Palestinian life under occupation are represented in our media at all.
Yeah, yeah. When you were there, were you ever afraid for your life?
Maybe after the fact.
Oh, really?
When things are happening, you don't necessarily think about that.
3 years into it, did you change your mind about? Oh gosh, I don't even know how to ask this question. I'm going to say it's going to be blunt, and forgive me if it's just too blunt. But did you change your mind about who was at fault?
No, I think when I first went there, one of the things that was most immediately clear to me, and I think this is true for most Americans and most people who, go to the West Bank with open eyes. What really struck me was, seeing the transformation of the entire landscape there. The checkpoints, the wall, the settlements on nearly every hilltop, the military bases on nearly every hilltop, the military presence everywhere, and seeing, kind of everywhere I went, running into settlers taking over land, soldiers putting down demonstrations. It was just instantly clear to me in a way that it hadn't been, although I'd read a great deal, and certainly studied up on the situation, how profoundly clear the power differential was. And I think a lot of people have this experience. You read about it here, you may know a great deal about the convoluted and complex histories, and think, man, it's a really complicated situation. And it is a really complicated situation. But when you go there, you very quickly reach a sort of disturbing amount of moral clarity about what's wrong. and the enormous power and the enormous, power for violence that the Israeli military has in the West Bank, as opposed to the Palestinian population, which has to survive underneath that occupation, is just astounding.
How can any president of the United States truly make decisions that will affect that part of the world without having the understanding that you now have? I mean, I would think that if I were the president, I would read your book, and I would try to read other books as well, because obviously I wouldn't have the luxury. I don't know that it's a luxury. I wouldn't have the opportunity to spend 3 years there as you did. So you would be the go-to person to find out what is the real truth here, and is there anything we can do?
Well, I hope you're right. I hope the president reads it. Because I think, unfortunately, American politics on this issue has been paralyzed for a long time, and I think that is finally starting to shift. I think Bernie Sanders talking about Palestinian dignity, on the floor of his debate with Hillary Clinton, and now trying to bring Palestinian rights into the Democratic Party platform prior to the convention. This is almost unprecedented. These were things that Americans in both parties simply didn't talk about. The blanket support for Israel was taken for granted, and that's starting to change, I think, because more and more Americans are growing more and more disturbed by the level of violence that the Israeli military visits upon Palestinians in both Gaza and the West Bank. And I think the power of the pro-Israel lobbies in this country is starting to fragment a little bit.
Well, you talk about burning dumpsters on the Jerusalem side, and that whole scenario there, that's pretty disconcerting.
Yeah, that was, towards the end of the book, I was writing about the events that followed the kidnapping and I don't even like to say this, still burning alive of a Palestinian teenager who was kidnapped from the neighborhood of Shuafat in almost exactly 2 years ago this month.
Yeah, it was just absolutely horrible.
So it is hard to figure out what to do. We've spoken to people who were living in what is now Israel before it became Israel. There were obviously older folks, and they would say, I was born in Palestine, but now it's considered Israel.
Yes.
But they're Jewish. And so so the landscape clearly, not the landscape literally, but the political landscape changed greatly because of that political decision that was made in 1948.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and decisions that were made, 30 years prior to that, when the British announced their support for a Jewish state in Palestine. I think one thing that it's really hard for that's sort of been buried in the way we think about this conflict in this place is that until the 1920s, Jews and Muslims and Arab Christians got along quite well in that part of the world. One of the reasons that Jews started thinking it was a good idea to go to Palestine rather than staying in Europe was because obviously Jews were not treated very well in Christian Europe, and in Muslim Palestine there was a great deal of not always friendship, but certainly more tolerance than Jews could expect to receive at that time anywhere in Europe. And I think it was the pressures brought to that region by England as a colonial power trying to solve some of these problems that created the lasting enmity that still exists there. And I think, today the U.S. is the one that plays that role, and it's the U.S.'s sort of unquestioning support of Israel that continues to stoke fires in the region.
Is there any happiness there? I mean, the photographs are phenomenal in the book, and you have one photograph in there of a woman with her children just leaning against a car, and their faces, have such sadness in them.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes it such a powerfully enchanting place to work is that there and to live. That there is, despite all of the manifest injustice and violence and oppression, which you see all the time, people live their lives. People have children, people fall in love, and people are very warm and very funny, and I think deal with the hardships in their lives with a great deal of humor and grace. And I hope a lot of that comes through in the book, because it certainly wasn't all misery all the time.
I wondered if you could comment on the differences between the attitudes, maybe even philosophical attitudes, of the younger folks as opposed to the older folks. Because in the younger folks, we would see I think we would be able to gauge whether there would be change in the future. Older folks are not usually going to change their mind about things.
I think the differences mainly have to do with relationships inside Palestinian society, and this all gets a little bit complicated, but I think that the younger generation has really lost all faith in the traditional, political factions and parties, and in the traditional leadership. And I think that's the main difference. I think the difference with regard their attitudes with regard to Israel and the occupation don't really vary that much. It's more in terms of forces that exist within their own society.
We'll take a little break, and I want to make sure we're fair to the book. I think we're so fascinated by that part of the world, and we question our own beliefs about that part of the world, and so much of what we believe about that part of the world is probably fair to say that we've been propagandized by the media. I'm going to ask Ben to comment on that on the other side of the break. So let's get the break out of the way, and we'll be right back.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. On Monday, intervals of clouds and sun with a thunderstorm or two, mainly during the afternoon and evening hours, the high 88 to 92. And partly cloudy overnight, low 72 to 76. For Tuesday, clouds and sun with a shower and thunderstorm or two, mainly in the afternoon, high 89 to 93. And for Wednesday, more clouds and sun with a couple of afternoon thunderstorms, high 88 to 92. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Joe Lundberg.
Hi, this is Brad. I want to take a moment to talk about a serious issue. In the next 5 years, the aviation industry is projected to have a shortage of commercial pilots. Now is the time to start training. Ocala Flying Club has started a scholarship for the youth of Marion County ages 17 to 24. The club will donate up to $4,000 towards a pilot's license. This will help get the student on their way to obtaining their commercial pilot license. If this sounds like something you would be interested in, or if you know someone that would be, please contact Ocala Aviation Services, 861-7484.
Palm Garden of Ocala leads in the area of orthopedic care with proven outcomes. Planning to have a new hip or knee joint due to arthritis or as the result of a fall? Palm Garden may be the answer. Guests appreciate the services of highly trained therapists and state-of-the-art equipment. And if you pre-register, you can secure a private room at no extra charge by mentioning this ad. Palm Garden makes no bones about it. They provide the best in orthopedic care. Call 854-6262. That's 854-6262.
You can't put it off any longer. It's time to replace your home's AC system.
The answer is ACEsolvesItAll.com and an exceptionally efficient AC system. Let the pros at ACE show you how you can save on energy monthly and give your family added comfort. The great thing is that ACEsolvesItAll.com is on call 7 to 7, 7 days a week at no extra charge.
For a limited time, mention WOCA and get a special discount.
Call 877-765-4ACE or ACEsolvesItAll.com.
All right, 10 minutes before 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Ben Ehrenreich is on the phone with us. He has written this very amazing book. It's called The Way to the Spring, Life and Death in Palestine. I haven't finished it, but it's really... It's an eye-opener for sure. And the one thing I wanted to say, Ben, is this. And I don't know if this... I'm sure... I don't know that you intended this, but this is what I get from it, at least the part I've read. When we've had major hurricanes here in Florida... If I look at the news that the rest of the country is seeing, I mean, I'm living in a real hellhole. but my real world was not like that. Some people had that, but I didn't. I could walk outside. I could still go to the 7-Eleven. I could still go to a McDonald's. I had gasoline. I was without electricity for a couple of days, I think. But the news media made it seem like everybody was living in this horrible situation. Mm-hmm. Is that the way it is too? Is the news media focusing on the worst? Is the average citizen just going about his or her daily life and in a remarkably normal way?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the normal can be quite awful, and certainly in a lot of the West Bank, particularly in the city of Hebron, I had things described to be as normal that I think most of the listeners out there would find completely, unbearable. But I think the main distortion in the way we understand the region through the media is that there are exceptions to this, but for the most part, we get an Israeli narrative that when an Israeli is hurt or killed, we hear about it. So that the impression we tend to get is just of Palestinians acting violently towards Israelis, which fits into our broader narratives about terrorism. What we don't hear about is the really just constant violence that Palestinians suffer at the hands of the Israeli military and the settler population within the West Bank. And it really is daily, and to learn about that through the news, you really have to make an effort to seek out alternative sources because it's simply not reported in the American media.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And you not only lived it, but you had to gain trust from a lot of the people there that you encountered, so you could have them tell you their stories.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of American journalists and not a lot of foreign journalists who are there's a small number who are based in the West Bank. For the most part, most American journalists who go over there are either based in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, or go into the West Bank for a day or two, or just go over when something kind of big and catastrophic is happening and sort of dip in. So I think it definitely helped me to gain people's trust that I was there, that I was there and listening and not going away, and that I was there when nothing was happening, and I was there when a lot was happening.
I think the part that's hard for us to understand is I'm going to use this as an example. If I went into Nazi Germany back in Nazi Germany and talked to the average person who lived there, they might not necessarily agree with the whole Nazi philosophy, but nevertheless it was going on, and it was a disease that had to be cured. I mean that had to be killed. We had to kill that. But there is no such comparison in these two people. There's nobody trying to, well, I guess you could argue this, but I'm going to say it and you can counter it. There's nobody trying to commit genocide in the same way that Nazi Germany was. Or am I wrong about that?
No, I think the Nazis are an extreme example, and it's
well, I used it so that I could say that's easy to say we need to defeat this. In this case, I don't know. I mean, we should be in favor of the people who are the ones not benefiting from the missiles that are being fired back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. That said, I think there isn't an attempt at genocide on the scale that the Nazis were not only attempting but almost succeeded at. But there is, I think, and people don't like to use this word, but throughout the West Bank, there is a fairly consistent policy of ethnic cleansing, and there are some Israeli politicians who have been quite open in their rhetoric and talking about just trying to push Palestinians out of what they understand as the land which Israel rightfully should own, and this has been quite consistent for some years now. The fact that there are Palestinians in the West Bank is a problem for a lot of Israeli politicians, and they want them elsewhere. Lieberman, Avigdor Lieberman, who's now the defense minister of Israel, has been very clear that he wants to get rid of all of the Arab Palestinians who live inside the state of Israel and to push them into the West Bank or send them somewhere else. I think there are policies which are state policies, which are anathema to the values that a lot of us hold.
The one thing I want to let the listener know about the book is that you will, by reading this book, see the other side of the story, the side you don't hear a whole lot about unless you happen to know some people. We've got some pretty prominent people in our community that are actually Palestinian, and they go back there frequently. And as I mentioned in the intro, they post photos from on Facebook. And it gives it. It helps us realize that, I don't know, that there are people on both sides who really deserve to have a better life. I guess that's the better way to say that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the hardest things to understand if you don't have friends, if there aren't people in your community, if you don't have access to these worlds, is if you're just watching cable news, you probably understand Palestinians mainly as terrorists. And you probably have no sense that there are millions of people, trying to live with dignity and trying to get the same things out of their lives that everybody here wants out of their lives.
What is more powerful, religion or culture for the Palestinians?
I think another one of the problems in how we understand the conflict from here is we understand it as a religious conflict, and for the most part, it is not a religious conflict. For the most part, it's a question of land. For the most part, I see it in a sort of colonial context that Israel wants this land, and the people on it happen to be Muslims. But for the most part, it's not articulated in religious terms on the Palestinian side.
Well, you can't say we haven't been fair, because we've certainly had people who argue the other side quite often. The way I look at it is like this: there are people living there who couldn't care less about politics, who probably aren't all that religious on either side. Who probably just want to open up their business each day and make $1 and feed their family. I'm guessing that's probably true for most people.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I knew a lot of religious people there. I knew a lot of people who were deeply involved in fighting the occupation in various ways. Who weren't religious in the slightest bit, who were completely secular, and whose motives were secular nationalist motives.
Do you still keep in touch with some of the people that you befriended over there?
Yeah, I've the last time I was back there was just a couple of weeks ago. So I try to get back there as much as I can and communicate with people, online otherwise.
You have a great advocate in you.
The book is called The Way to the Spring, Life and Death in Palestine. Ben Ehrenreich is the author, and I have a copy that I would like to give away. If you call me, I'll give it to you. The rest of us have to go buy it. Ben, do you have a website, first of all?
Yeah, it's just my name, benehrenreich.net.
Okay, and the book is available wherever books are sold?
Wherever books are sold, yeah. Online at Amazon and at your finer independent bookstores.
Okay, well, I know it's probably not easy talking to all of us radio geeks, but I think we're all fascinated by what you've done and how you've done it, and the fact that you dedicated so much time to it.
Yes.
My goodness, 3 years. That's a lot of time,
You're
Ben.
Amazing.
Thank you for being on the air with us today. Thanks
a lot, Larry.
That was a cool interview. We'll be right back.
Website at www.woca.com. 1370 WOCA.
Fox News Radio, I'm Pat O'Neill. More than 20 West Virginia counties under a flash flood watch, with more rain forecast as residents trying to clean up after a week of flooding. Summersville Dam Manager Toby Wood.
The highest record we have of Craigsville is 25.5 feet back in 1985, and it went to 29 feet this time.
25 have died in the flood, several people still missing. Pope Francis with an apology on behalf of the church.
On the flight home from Armenia late Sunday, the Pope was asked if the church owed an apology to homosexuals. The 79-year-old said that not only gays deserved an apology, but also all those the church has marginalized, such as the poor and exploited women and children forced into labor.
Fox Radio's Courtney Walsh in Rome. Wall Street opening sharply lower amid the fallout over last week's British vote to leave the EU. The British Treasury saying its economy can withstand any uncertainty. Fox News, we report, you decide.
The Ford Freedom Sales Event is on. It's our biggest event